Hello, you lovely listeners. I'm Amy. Welcome to the Really Good Conversations podcast, where we will delve into the minds of the business people we have met in the process of launching our first card game. We will be uncovering their secrets to success, their biggest mistakes, and sharing the key lessons they have picked up en route. So, if you're looking for an engaging chinwag mixed with business insights and a good pinch of fun, you're in the right place. Let's have a really good conversation. Welcome to the Really Good Conversations podcast. Today I am joined by Dr Kristy Goodwin, a leading neuro-performance expert, speaker and author who specialises in helping people thrive in our digitally driven world. Her books include Dear Digital, We Need to Talk, and Raising Your Child in a Digital World. Welcome to the podcast, Dr Kristy.
Thank you for having me, Amy. Great to be here.
Really looking forward to this conversation, and we've already been chatting on this very interesting topic before we've hit record on this, so we could speak at length. But before we jump into some of the key topics of the digital well-being space, can you tell us a little bit of your background and what sparked your interest in neuro-performance and digital well-being?
Yes. So I initially started my career. I had a very firm career trajectory mapped out as a teacher. And then I became a researcher and an academic. And I became what I call now a frustrated academic. My research looked at the impact that technology was having on children's developing brains and bodies. But I became frustrated. I could see all of this great research being done by colleagues and academics. But I knew as a former teacher that research often didn't get through to the people on the ground. So I have a real passion for research, but I have also just recently been described by a client as a pracademic, somebody who is practical and academic. And so my passion became becoming that conduit for research and science, taking what we know about technology, its intersection with neuroscience and psychology, and then making that really tangible, practical, palatable for people. And so for many years, I ran workshops and keynotes speaking about technology and its impact on children and teens, what I call screenagers. And then my business has evolved in recent years because I was rushed to a code red emergency ward at the height of the pandemic. Not only did I contract COVID, but at the same time, I was experiencing uncontrollable seizures. Doctors were at a loss to know why, and I had yet another seizure. Our Great Dane Tommy found me convulsing next to the bed. I was rushed to a code red emergency ward, hooked up to a ventilator, unable to breathe. And after extensive medical testing, the only reason the doctors came up with as to why I was so sick with COVID and having these seizures was that I was also burnt out. And so for years, I had been working in completely incompatible ways with what I say is our human operating system. Unfortunately, as humans, we have some biological constraints that we can't outperform. And so I was living, as I think many of us are, in a world where we're always on, really focused, never recovered. And that is not how I call our brain our HOS. That is not how our HOS has been biologically designed. And so I was hooked up to a ventilator, struggling to breathe, and I was forced to confront my own possible mortality. For years, my body had been whispering to me, slow down, work at a more sustainable pace. But at the height of the pandemic, as a speaker, I was not only trying to resurrect a speaking career, I called it the digital pirouette. It made it sound more graceful than a pivot. But I was trying to also, I'd been tasked with the impossible job of homeschooling 3 boys. My husband had conveniently been deemed an essential worker. So it was a period of incredibly high stress, but the years before that had also been stressful. And I'd ignored those whispers, and I think we all do this, those whispers from our body, release the stress valve, work at a more sustainable pace. But I ignored those whispers until my body had no other option than to shout at me. And as I lay there in that code red ward, wondering, was I going to get home and see my 3 sons again? I wondered, did my husband know the login to the Netflix password? Did he know how to do the online lunch orders for the boys? It's really random, the things that go through your head. But I realized laying in that bed, I'd paid what I see so many people that I work with today pay, and I call it the success tax. Many of us achieve incredible success, but we sacrifice either our physical health, our mental well-being, or our most important relationships, or the trifecta, which is all three, where we sacrifice them or sabotage them, all in the pursuit of success. And I made a pledge. I was lucky enough to leave that hospital bed, but I actually heard the woman next to me through the paper petition curtain take the final breath of her life. And it is a moment I will never forget. I thought I was going to face the same reality. And as I lay there in that hospital bed with the hum of the ventilator behind me, I made a pledge to myself that if I recovered, I would start living and working in ways that were compatible with my human operating system. Now, I was one of the lucky ones who walked out of that code red ward. And ever since then, this was way back at the end of 2020, my life has turned around. You know, I have transformed how I live, how I run my business. And so I've shared this with other adults around what is sustainable peak performance. How can we thrive in the digitally demanding world we all now find ourselves in, professionally and personally? And the reality is we have to live in harmony with our HOS. So that's now what I do. And the journey, you know, the career trajectory that was planned to be the teacher, I'm just teaching, but in a different way now. So my mission is really, I want people to recognize that we have really finite time as humans. You know, it is estimated. There's a great book by Oliver Burkeman called 4,000 Weeks. That means we have 4,000 Sundays in our entire lifetime. And I look around at the people that I coach. I look at the audiences that I speak to. I look at my friends, my colleagues. So many of us are living as what I call low-res, powered-down humans. We're like that blurry, pixelated versions of ourselves. We're stressed, we're exhausted, we're chronically distracted. That's not how I want to make the most of my 4,000 Sundays. So I'm on a mission to power people up, to get people living and working in alignment with their human operating system so that they have the capacity to make the most of whatever those, you know, whether it's 2,000 or 1,000 Sundays that they have left in their lifetime.
Wow. That is very, mic drop moment, thought-provoking, isn't it? Crikey. And what a journey you've been on in those, last 5 years, really. And, I'm thinking as you're telling this story, I'm thinking, crikey, if you have found yourself in that situation, perhaps of that, in that burnout and really, running on empty, but you are from that research, the knowledge and what's happening to the brain and the body. And if you found yourself in that situation, what about all the majority of the population who don't have that knowledge or insight, but are still just going around on that hamster wheel, going from one day to the next in this pixelated blur? That is actually a very scary thought, actually.
Yeah. And that really was the impetus for me to speak about this. It took me a couple of years, to be honest. I didn't tell many people. Some people knew I'd been hospitalized, but I didn't share why, that it was driven by burnout and exhaustion. And the problem with burnout is, as the name suggests, it is a slow burn. And it's a slow erosive spiral. Now, one of the problems with burnout in its simplest definition is unresolved stress. And the World Health Organization says it's characterized by 3 dimensions. 1, prolonged periods of physical and psychological exhaustion. 2, increased cynicism and negativity. And 3, reduced efficacy. So feeling like we can't get through the volume or quality of work that we once did. And it needs to be the presence of those 3 criteria simultaneously. Now, the problem with the feeling stressed or feeling exhausted is that often at burnout, our adrenals are no longer producing the amount, if any, cortisol, so we don't actually feel stressed. And so even though the irony wasn't lost on me, I was running seminars and speaking, delivering virtual keynotes in lockdown about stress and about burnout. I talk about digital burnout, but I didn't even see it in myself. And so this it's rife. A study was only published 2 weeks ago, the Global Workplace Burnout Study, and it's telling us that 35% of employees and leaders globally are currently experiencing burnout. We know, and study after study is telling us that more women than men are experiencing, stress and burnout. This is an issue that's affecting so many of us, hence why I say many of us are living as those low-res, powered-down humans. So I don't want people to get to the end of their 4,000 weeks and realise that they've missed out on living the life that they were designed to live and that they deserve to live too.
Crikey, absolutely. And obviously we can go into a bit more this topic of, that high performance in the digital demanding world. And you've highlighted some of those key factors that link to burnout. But what do you see as some of the biggest challenges that adults are facing today when it comes to managing their digital lives effectively?
Yeah, I see huge amounts of stress. And it's sometimes very subtle ways that technology is making all of us stressed. I often say it's invisible, but it's invasive. And so we know, for example, constant alerts and notifications stress us because we have ancient Paleolithic brains. Our HOS was biologically designed to go and forage, hunt, and get information, not to have unsolicited information constantly being thrust at us. It tricks our brain into thinking it's urgent and important, hence why we pick up our phone and open the notification.
Yeah.
So we've got these elevated stress levels. Another thing, we are not biologically designed to look at something close distance for long periods of time. Our HOS is designed to stare at things in the distance. And so when our eyes converge on a relatively small surface area, like they do on our phones, our laptops, or our desktops or tablets, it biologically triggers the stress response, because we have a very narrow gaze during heightened stressful situations. Now, what this also does is that it means that we trigger our stress response because when our eyes look at a small surface area, we don't sigh anywhere near as much as what we should. Now, part of our HOS is that we should sigh roughly every 5 minutes whilst we're awake. It's a natural biological mechanism to regulate our oxygen and carbon dioxide levels. But when we're looking at a screen, our sigh rate falls off the cliff. So what does this mean? We're often in this heightened state just by simply looking at our screen, let alone the stressful email, the upsetting news content that you're consuming on social media, the really blunt text message you get from one of your family members. Just the sheer act of being on our screens makes us more stressed. We're more sedentary when we're on our screens, so we don't make the neurochemicals that help us to also feel really good and regulate our stress response. We're not getting as much sunlight, and that can lead to all sorts of issues with our vision, but also with our mental health and performance. And the big one for many of us is that now we are spending more time with pixels than with people. And one, particularly for females tend to regulate their stress through in-person connection. We all do as humans, but this is particularly amplified for people who identify as female, because that social in-person connection is a quick way to regulate our nervous system and for us to regulate our stress response. So I think it's this cumulative effect, and as I said, invisible but often invasive effect. And so if I was to summarize it in 3 points, I think we are living in a world where we're always on, really focused, and never recovered. And so we have these really big problems with stress, exhaustion, and distraction. That's not how our HOS was designed. And so I think this is an issue affecting every human, children, teens, adults alike, but one that we need to address, because the digital world's not going away. It's not a fad or a phase. It's here to stay. And I often say, tech's got its tentacles in every part of our lives.
Yes.
So what we have to do is start to live with it, but live with it in ways that are congruent with this HOS that we have inherited, rather than in conflict. And that's where I think the problem is. So many of us are living in ways that are completely incompatible with our human operating system.
Absolutely. Gosh. And we touched on this before we started recording, is that, there's a lot of focus on, children and children's and screens and screen time and all that. That's a lot of that's being discussed. But actually, when we really all look at our own habits as adults of, varying generations, you actually perhaps are a bit alarmed of your own habits and how they're affecting you as well. Can you share any tips for our listeners for achieving high performance without the digital burnout? I mean, you mentioned it's not going away, so we're all still learning to live with it, and it's evolving and changing all of the time. But what tips can we try to take back some control?
Yes. So I have developed something that's called the Flourishing Framework, and it's all about science-backed strategies that help us to flourish rather than flounder in the digital world. And there's 3 pillars in the framework. This is what I share in my keynotes and in my coaching work. And the first pillar is all around building our stress adaptability. An inevitable characteristic of living in our modern digital world is that we will experience stress, be that the stressful email, back-to-back virtual meetings, just looking at our screen. How can we develop our capacity to build our stress tolerance, to reduce the little micro stresses, something as simple as turning off alerts and notifications. Remember, they trick our brain into thinking that they're urgent and important. And building our stress tolerance. How can we become more adept at experiencing stress? One of the issues with our digital world is instant gratification. We're hot, we flick on the air conditioner, we're hungry, we order Uber Eats. We are, as humans, very rarely experiencing physical stress today. That means we're equally ill-equipped to deal with psychological stress. And so this is why we have to pursue hard things. We know from really recent fascinating research that part of the brain called the anterior mid-cingulate cortex, that is basically the willpower center of the brain. That gets activated when we have to do hard things. Vigorous physical exercise, having a cold shower, swimming in the ocean in the middle of winter, pursuing the sauna, deliberate heat exposure, pursuing hard things. We know in people who do those hard things, that region of their brain, that anterior mid-cingulate cortex, is physically bigger. This means that we can train that willpower center of our brain. We can train our tolerance to handle stress. So this is why we've, in recent times, seen popularity in things like ice baths and cold showers. And there's robust science behind that. We can develop our tolerance for stress. We also need to become part of this stress adaptability, which is this first pillar, is all around developing our resilience. When we experience stress, how can I respond, not react? The angry email that I get, the constant barrage of notifications. And one of the most scientifically simple and free ways is to sigh. 2 to 3 sigh cycles, and a sigh is simply 2 inhalations through your nose and a longer exhalation through your mouth. Doing that 2 to 3 times will regulate your stress response. You can do it on your virtual meetings. Just make sure you're on mute so your colleagues don't look at you strangely when you're exhaling. But sighing, looking in the distance. Remember, we're not designed to spend hours looking close by, so staring at something in the distance. So that first pillar is all around building our capacity or that adaptability with stress. The second pillar, I think, is the super skill of the 21st century, and it's a skill under threat. It is our FQ. I have to be careful how I say that one, our focus quotient. We are living in and working in a world that's been deliberately engineered to be distracting and disruptive. How can we orient and control our focus? Simple things like micro habits that I often share, putting your phone somewhere where you cannot see it when you want to get your focused work done. When you want to be present with an important family member, you're out on a date, you're having a cup of tea with your grandma, you're taking your son or daughter out for an ice cream. The mere presence of your phone, even if it is on silent and face down, drops our cognitive performance by an estimated 7 to 10%. A study was done with restaurant goers, and they asked them to put their phones in a box before they went in to enjoy their meal. And they had another cohort of people who were able to take their phones into the restaurant. The study found that those people who left their phone outside of the restaurant reported 2 really key things. They reported much more engaging conversations, and they reported that the meal was far tastier, even though both cohorts of people ate the exact same types of meals. So just that sheer presence of our phone is enough to distract us. It's enough to compromise the conversation that we're having. So what can we do to really build up that skill of our FQ? How can we be directing our attention? So that's the second pillar. And the final pillar is, if we want to thrive as part of this flourishing framework, is all around reframing recovery. How can we see rest as a peak performance pit stop? Too many of us today are buying into this hustle, grind, work longer paradigm of success, and that's not what our human operating system needs. We, for example, we know part of our prefrontal cortex, so the part of our brain that does all of our mentally heavy lifting work, our prefrontal cortex only has a 4 to 6 hour battery life per day. Now, I'm not saying you should only work 4 to 6 hours. You can if you choose to do. But if you're going to really genuinely do the mentally taxing, challenging work, you've got a 4 to 6 hour window at best. We also know we have something called ultradian rhythms. And ultradian rhythms mean we go through a peak in our energy and focus for roughly 90 minutes, and then we inevitably hit around a 20-minute trough. Now, this means we are designed to work and recover. And we have to stop seeing rest as something frivolous, that it's a reward, that it's something that we get round to when we go on holidays or that we do on Sunday afternoon. We have to bake recovery into our days for sustainable performance and well-being. And so they're the 3 pillars. So, the first one was all around building that stress adaptability. The second one is all around building focus. And the last one's about embedding recovery, closing your eyes for 30 seconds. When we're spending a lot of time looking at our screens, part of our brain called, or 2 parts, part of our brain, one part's called the occipital lobe, so it processes what we see. And another part, especially if we're still doing a lot of virtual meetings, a unique region of the brain is activated called the fusiform gyrus, and it processes faces. Those 2 regions of the brain are estimated to take up around 40% of our brain architecture. So constantly being on virtual meetings where we see ourselves is exhausting and depleting. So closing your eyes for 30 seconds gives those parts of the brain a break. A 15-minute walk every 2 hours helps to produce a whole lot of neurochemicals that help us to stay alert, to stay focused, and to feel rejuvenated afterwards. So as you can see, they're really simple things that we can apply. Yes. I just think technology has sort of nudged us away from our human operating system. And we just have to be far more intentional and proactive about living and working in harmony with it.
Well, that is all. I've intently been listening as you've been explaining all of that, because it's mind-blowing, but some of it's so, shall we say, obvious, and everything you've said there was totally relatable. We know we're all doing these things, and I know myself, you can be guilty of, you get your head down, stuck into something, or you feel that, right, work is that I've been at my desk all day and got the tasks all done. As well. And when you were talking about rest, so many of us can say we were, resting at, on an evening. But in reality, actually, we continue to fill our heads with more stuff because we're just on the phones, scrolling or maybe watching content on there or watching something on TV. So we're not actually resting how we think we are resting, really, because we're just continuing to, layer on more and more information.
Yeah, and our brains need that recovery is not just for our well-being, it's for our performance and ideation. I don't know about you, Amy, but for me, I have never, ever in my entire existence ever come up with a creative or good idea in my inbox or in an Excel spreadsheet.
No.
My great ideas land for me when I'm on planes with no Wi-Fi, when I'm walking, when I'm in the shower, when I'm in the ocean, when I'm driving. And what we know is we activate, the neuroscience tells us we activate something called the default mode network, DMN. I suggest we remember it by saying do mostly nothing. We have to be far more intentional about carving out pockets of time in our days and weeks where we are bored, where we are idle with our thoughts, where our mind has the opportunity to meander. We used to call it daydreaming. Yeah. We now fill that void with our devices. You order your coffee, you pick up your phone. Some people sit at a red traffic light, pull up their phone. They get in the elevator, pull up their phone. I watched a whole lot of people the other day at a dog park. Not one of them were interacting with their dogs. They were all flicking the ball back on their screens. So we've just, I think, again, and I'm not making us feel guilty, the tech has been engineered to be addictive and appealing and distracting. This is why we have to be far more intentional about carving out that time and being bored, being idle and being okay with it, because it is for our well-being, but it's also for that, especially if you're a creative person. And for most of us, ideating, if we're predominantly knowledge workers, we need that white space.
And I say it often, actually, in my, life to Alex, I'm like, I literally need time to think.
Yes.
Because if it's not me thinking work-related things or thinking things for the little one or whatever, like there is almost no just clear space in my mind to think up whether it's creative things or dreaming. And it's funny you mentioned daydreaming, because daydreaming is probably, we've all been ingrained that that's a waste of time and it's a negative thing to do. If you think of the school days, it's like stop daydreaming, stop. Actually, it's beneficial for the brain and the mind to do these things.
And thankfully now, again, thanks to the advances in technology, with brain scans, we can actually show that really unique regions of the brain are highly active when we're idle. And so providing white space, especially after you've learned new content, actually helps you to consolidate what you've learned. Going for a walk. When we walk, we create something called optic flow, so things move past our eyes, or when we're driving or running or any sort of movement. Optic flow quietens down part of the brain called the amygdala. The amygdala is the worry center of our brain. So, a 15-minute walk, a 10-minute stroll is enough to help not only calm down our emotional state, because it quietens down that amygdala, that worry center of the brain, but it also gives ideas time to percolate and to germinate. So again, we just have to be so much more intentional and more, I guess, creating those guardrails around our time. So that we still have the things that make us, help us, I guess, to function and flourish as a human.
Yeah. And what you've also got me thinking as you're talking is it's almost like we as humans have felt that we need to perform as the computer performs. We need to be as good as the computer and the phone, which is obviously always on. So obviously, as we all have seen in our careers, all the different tools and technologies that have come in. And it's almost in a way like humans are needing to prove they can still do just as good as work as what a computer can do. And therefore, we're like almost morphing ourselves into being this robotic computer state in a way.
And it's interesting because we don't even expect our computers and machinery to keep working. We provide upgrades. They have downtime, maintenance, we do services, but we often don't even provide ourselves that same opportunity. So that's why, that third pillar of the framework is so critical. We have to reframe recovery. Recovery is a right and a responsibility. It's not a reward. Gartner research tells us that proactive rest leads to a 26% improvement in performance. So it's not just a well-being lever, it's a performance and productivity lever too. So I often use the analogy of race cars. I call them peak performance pit stops. We need to see rest if we want to achieve peak performance, if we want to sustain peak performance, like a little pit stop. Now, in 2025, race cars are so sophisticated that they don't need to actually pull in really to take pit stops. They could potentially finish that entire race without ever taking a pit stop. The reason they do take pit stops is that they don't want that race car crawling to the finish line. They want that race car finishing in an optimal state. We need to be like that. We need to see those pit stops as those performance levers that we can pull.
Yeah. And I mean, you do see in other cultures like Japan, in school and work, that people have the power naps and it's celebrated and it's a known way of life. Why do you think that's never taken on in other cultures?
Well, it has. The problem with naps, and I'll share this as a neuroscientist, is if we have a nap that's too long or too late in the day, it often impacts our subsequent sleep that night. I think we've all done the nap on the lounge on Saturday afternoon. We're reading a book and the sun's streaming in and we nod off. If you have toddlers, you don't certainly have that privilege unless they're having their naps. You probably have something thrown at you to wake you up. But when you do nap too long or too late, it really impacts your subsequent sleep. Now, there's some new research about a technique that's been popularized by Andrew Huberman, and it's called non-sleep deep rest, NSDR. And non-sleep deep rest only requires 10 minutes. You can do it sitting up or laying down. Now, one of the problems in workplaces is that, let's be honest, despite how progressive you might claim you are, if you walk past and see one of your colleagues laying down having a nap, we're all going to make judgments. With NSDR, you can do it sitting up, and it mimics what happens in sleep, but it's not sleep. Sometimes it's referred to as pseudo sleep. And so you get some of the same restorative benefits, you get some of the same cognitive, emotional benefits, a boost in your focus, you get an increase in what we call striatal dopamine, but you only need 10 minutes. And it's basically rooted in a practice that was once still called yoga nidra. So it's a progressive muscle relaxation, and so it calms our body and our brain down, but it gives us enough of a hit so that after that 10 minutes, you feel focused and energized and can continue on with what you're doing. So that's another alternative for people. If the nap doesn't look professional, it's true. And unlike a nap, with NSDR, you can do it later in the day. It's also a great one if your listeners are someone who is prone to waking up in the middle of the night and finding it hard to fall back asleep. That can also be a great tool to use then. So NSDR, a really good one, and also a great one for any people who are not getting enough sleep. If you've had a terrible night's sleep due to children, a snoring partner, jet lag, NSDR can be that little boost that you need.
And probably better than going for another coffee.
Definitely.
We all go, I'm going to have another coffee. Well, actually, if you maybe just took 10 minutes quiet time, would be more restorative than the coffee.
Yes. So I know this is a trick for many people. And a lot of my clients I shared this one with. If you hit that energy slump in the afternoon, many of us think I'll have a quick coffee, or I call it, the biscuit o'clock. We gravitate to the carbs. 3 really simple things you can do to beat that afternoon slump is NSDR. Another one is getting out in sunlight. Sunlight activates our hypothalamus. It's literally like turning the lights on in our brain. So standing out, you don't have to stare at the sun, but being out in the sun can make you feel much more alert and focused. And another one is going for a walk. When we move, we create a whole lot of neurochemicals, dopamine, serotonin, endocannabinoids. They help us to feel focused and alert again. So before I have the coffee on those afternoon slump days, those 3 things, NSDR, some sunlight and a quick walk, and it makes a huge difference.
Fantastic. Gosh, you've shared so much fascinating knowledge, obviously research, insights, and as well tips for both. Yeah, myself, I'm almost writing notes, but I'm like, well, I know I'll be listening back to this episode, so I don't need to write them right now. But that is fantastic. Something that I'd like to just dive into before we go into some of our questions from our pack is just having more of a think of that human connection and, how the digital saturated lifestyle affects human relationships and genuine connections.
Yeah, so there was some fascinating research done a couple of years ago, and they compared what happened in our brains and bodies when we had a face-to-face interaction, a real-time conversation, versus when that conversation was replicated digitally. So it was a text message, a WhatsApp message, some sort of digital communication. And what they clearly found was that when it was that face-to-face, in-person human connection, our brain produced a hormone called oxytocin. Oxytocin is sometimes called the love hormone. It's the social bonding hormone. We do not get that when we're having digital communications. The group that had the digital-based communications, their bodies produced cortisol, the stress hormone. So this tells us that no technology at this point in time, whether avatars, whether the metaverse will change this is yet to be explored. But at this point in time, our bodies react very differently to in-person, face-to-face conversations versus digital communications. I'm not saying we shouldn't do digital communications. There are certainly rich opportunities and need to do that. But there's nothing. And this is why we hear it. After the pandemic, when we went back to in-person events, there was a level of excitement because we realized even if we ran a virtual conference on Zoom or Teams or WebEx, it was nothing in comparison to that in-person connection. So I often say our most fundamental psychological need as humans is connection. We are hardwired for relational connection. That hasn't changed. And that's why we have to be careful. Yes, technology can be a conduit for connection, social media, WhatsApp groups, emails, the plethora of digital communication tools we've now got at our disposal, but they are by no means a replica or a replacement for that in-person connection.
Gosh, and you highlight in your work you do that, we are more connected than ever before, but then we feel more disconnected than ever. Why do you identify that that's happening? I mean, it almost feels obvious from what you've been saying so far, but...
Yeah, and it's a global epidemic. The US Surgeon General has reported that loneliness is at epidemic levels in the US and internationally. In the UK, they have a minister for loneliness. Australian research says that 1 in 4 Australians are persistently lonely. And so what I think is happening is that, yes, digital communications, social media and the other ways that we connect online do fulfill a need, but it's not that deep connection that we get. All the nuances that we get with in-person discussions, body language, tone, micro gestures. We know, for example, on video calls, if there is anything more than a 1.2 second lag between when I say something and you respond, the person speaking can misconstrue that lag. It's easy to happen. If you've got dodgy internet connection or there's a whole lot of people on your WebEx call, we've all been there. That can be misconstrued as you having said something inappropriate, or they didn't respond, or they don't like what I said. So there's just no replica for that connection in real time. So I think many of us have reverted and convinced ourselves that the 400 friends that we've got on Facebook, or, the thousands of followers on Instagram or TikTok are conduits for real connection. They're not. They are valid, and I'm not dismissing them. For our young people, the digital world plays an absolutely pivotal role, and a core way that they do connect is digitally. We just can't delude ourselves into thinking that it's the same or superior, because it's not. So I think we do have a loneliness epidemic globally. Research from workplaces is telling us that many of our employees are feeling really lonely, whether that's because of hybrid work, distributed work, a whole plethora of reasons.
Gosh, yeah, that all really resonates, exactly what you're saying. I'm an expat here in Australia, so I am digitally trying to keep in touch with lots of friends and family, around the world. And at times, you feel connected, but also disconnected from, a lot of people as well, through just, WhatsApp is typically my go-to. And I try to use the voice note element to bring more of the human connection.
Yes. And it's interesting, many of us, again, in the pandemic, went on to video calls. Initially it might have been Skype and then Zoom and then Teams or whatever we did. And some relatively new research tells us that we attune to conversations far better when it's audio only. When there is a visual element, there's something called impression management. We start to focus on what we look like. We notice that, our eyebrows need plucking. We're going thin on top. We hold our head in a different position. It's akin to walking into a meeting room and putting a mirror in front of yourself.
Yes.
We also know that can be, exhausting. We're processing a whole lot of superfluous information. Like, we're looking, if we're really honest, at everybody's background. Have they got the washing basket there? Is there a naked child running behind in the background? We've all seen that meme of that poor man trying to deliver a presentation and his child Zoom bombing him. So yes, we do attune far more to audio only. We also know on video calls, usually if it's just us on a laptop or a desktop, we sit around 60 centimetres from our monitor. 60 centimetres is what social anthropologists call our intimate social distance. Now, if this person is unfamiliar to you, if it's a prospective colleague, prospective client, someone who you've never met, being in your intimate social distance can feel really stressful. Mary from marketing or Bob from accounts can really make us feel overloaded and stressed. So I think it's fascinating. We all sort of default to the video call, but we're often far better just to go back to that audio only version.
Yeah. Wow. And I had a phone call with someone a while ago, and we were talking about a bit of a topic of, screens versus phone. And she said in her work, she's a coach. Yep. She said in her work, she does her sessions via telephone. So because people speak more openly and tell the truth on the phone, not video. And I thought, wow, how interesting.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think the research is telling us the same thing.
Wow.
But again, it's evolving. This is the I guess I call this the digital dilemma. Technology is evolving at rapid rates, but our ancient human operating system isn't necessarily. So we've got to go back to what do we need, and often having too much for our brain to process overloads us. So we tune out to the superfluous things.
Absolutely. Gosh, well, this has been, such a fascinating conversation, Kristy. Thank you so much for everything you've shared. And we could really go on in such detail into other realms of this. I mean, as we said before, we were talking, we were more talking about the children's and the teens sort of a demographic for tech and such. And we could, certainly go on into more areas. Absolutely. But I will move us on to ask us some quick questions from our pack of cards. Yep. Which, I guess hopefully is to sometimes learn a bit deeper about somebody and to go beyond some of the surface level chat we have with people. So, question number 1. If you were a superhero, what would your superpower be?
Oh, I would be a sleep ninja. I am somebody who has struggled with insomnia. And as a researcher, I know how critical sleep is for our performance and well-being. Yeah. It is an ongoing issue at times. I have mastered it to some extent. But I would wave a magic wand. I see so many people who are chronically sleep deprived, and sleep is the elixir of life. We all know when we don't get good quality or quantity of sleep. So I would have some sort of sleep ninja power skills where I could cast my wand. It would help with my children, getting them to sleep instantaneously rather than getting out of bed for 18 glasses of water and a quick chat again at 9 o'clock. So yes, give me sleep in a wand and I would dust that magic in lots of places, including my own bed and my own home.
Fantastic. And it's I think we all have this. The more you try to get to sleep because you're wanting to get to sleep, either you are genuinely tired or you've got to get up in the morning. It's almost like the more you can't, it's, definitely experience that. Question number 2. If you came with a warning label, what would it say?
I got criticised for this in school, but now it's turned into a professional superpower. Watch out, she can talk. I
love it. I would probably have a similar sort of thing people could say about me. But yes, brilliant.
Have a chat.
Absolutely. And question number 3, and gosh, I mean, you've got a lot of insights and research from the work that you've done over the years, but what is one piece of wisdom you want to pass on to future generations?
Oh, that one's easy for me. As humans, we have 3 currencies that we have to fiercely protect. They are the most important things in our lives. They are our time, our energy, and our attention. And they are the 3 that are under threat in a digital world, as I've said multiple times today, that have been engineered to be distracting and disruptive. We have to control our time, energy, and attention. If we control those, we will live the best versions of our lives possible.
That is fantastic. And I think not even just for the future generations, that's something we all need to hear, don't we? And the finishing question that I love to ask all of our guests is, if you could ask any person, dead or alive, a question, who would it be and what would you ask them?
So my person would be Oprah. I have had a long-standing infatuation with Oprah's career from when I used to charge home from school, get home in time because there was no, streaming of things back then. You either had to be home or you had to get your VCR. I was clever and got the book or booklet to tell me the step-by-step instructions to record with the VCR. I don't know if you remember recording Oprah episodes. So I've had a long-standing obsession interest in Oprah. So I would love to ask Oprah, and this is a question I love asking a lot of people, is what would you have done differently to make the most of your 4,000 weeks? If we only get 4,000 weeks in our lifetime, I worry so much of us, so many of us are squandering them to really unimportant things. We've lost control of where we put our attention because we're in this digital world that dictates where our attention and focus goes. So I would love to ask Oprah, what would she have done differently with her 4,000 weeks in her lifetime, given she's lived an incredible life, has spoken to incredible people. if she could distill the wisdom into some little drops, what would she have done differently?
Beautiful. Love that question. And gosh, you're making me think about some of my weekends. So I do like to try and, live them to the full. But how can our listeners find out more about you, your work, and, connect with you?
Yes. So I'm telling you to tame your tech habits, but you can find out more online. I try and share bite-sized bits of information predominantly on Instagram and LinkedIn. And I have a digital home at drkristygoodwin.com. I deliver keynotes and workshops and an executive coach, helping people to power up their performance with science-backed strategies. And we also use innovative technology. We use wearable devices to track people's performance and wellbeing metrics. So that's where you can come and learn how you can live the most with your 4,000 weeks.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your time today and everything that you've shared.
Thank you.
I'll be sure to include all those links in our show notes as well.
Excellent. Thank you for your time.
Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Be sure to check out the show notes for more information on today's guests. And if really good conversations are your thing, hit subscribe and join us next time for more business journeys, insights and banter.